Point number 2, which we looked at extensively last week, is never read a verse. In other words, never read a verse in isolation. It is Greg Kukel, who is the director of Stand to Reason Apologetics Ministry, that coined this phrase, and he's also written an article and I think a booklet on never read a verse. And this one point can be really a point that revolutionizes the way you study the Bible, right? As we looked at last week, context is the queen of interpretation. Bible scholars say that there are 3 rules of interpretation. Rule number 1 is context. Rule number 2, I told you last week, is context. And rule number 3, no prizes for this, is context again. So context is the queen of biblical interpretation. Sometimes it is the historical context, sometimes it's the geographic context, sometimes it is the audience context, sometimes it's a writer context, and depending on how well we get a grasp of the context, we will get a grasp of the text in question, right? Now, all of us are very familiar with Google Maps, and we know when to zoom in and when to zoom out. But sadly, when we read the Bible, and especially if you're reading the Bible with a magnifying glass, you are what is called as a micro reader, and you are all the time zoomed into passages, particularly verses, and sometimes even phrases within verses, and sometimes even single words, and we blow it up and enlarge it so much that we miss the beauty and the meaning of the text around it, and we totally misunderstand the verse. Okay, John 3:16, I told you, was my favorite verse. If we were to quiz people around and ask us, what is John 3:15, John 3:17, the likelihood that we will get both of those verses correct is actually quite thin. Okay, so several of you might have your favorite verses in the Bible. Can any one of you key your favorite verses in the Bible in the chat box? And take a moment to do that. Let me look at what's coming up. Anybody? Any of your favorite verses? Have we got some entries yet? It's okay, don't be afraid. What's your favorite verse? John 1:1. That's a smart one because there's no John 1:0. At least there's a John 1:2, which I'm sure most of us know by heart. Yeah, Psalm 23:1. That's a smart one again. There's no Psalm 23:0. Matthew 6:33. Okay, there you go. So what is 6:32 and what is 6:34, and so on and so forth. You know, if we were to do this exercise truly, it won't take much long for us to discover that we have been in the habit of learning verses in isolation. Now, we need to understand if we do that, we will be missing the beauty of what the context actually communicates to us, and therefore we could run the error of misinterpreting God's word and misrepresenting and teaching God's word if we are teaching it to people. So every word we need to understand as part of a verse, and every verse we need to understand as part of a paragraph. Every paragraph is part of a book. Every book is part of a genre of writing, and every genre is part of the whole. And so it's very, very important for us to stop this habit of reading only a verse in isolation. Okay, that's the golden principle number 2. Let me just illustrate that to you with an example. Okay, take a moment to read this, and as you skim through this, I'll read it for you. A newspaper is better than a magazine. At the end of it, I'll ask you a question. Newspaper is better than a magazine. A seashore is a better place than the street. At first, it's better to run than to walk. You may have to try several times. It takes some skill, but it's easy to learn. Even young children can enjoy it. Once successful, complications are minimal. Birds seldom get too close. Rain, however, soaks in very fast. Too many people doing the same thing can also cause problems. Once one needs lots of room, if there are no complications, it can be very peaceful and pleasant. A rock will serve as an anchor. If things break loose from it, however, you will not get a second chance. This is a kind of a riddle, a quiz for you. Can anyone tell me what this paragraph is describing? You can type it in your chat box again. What is this paragraph describing? Newspaper is better than a magazine. Seashore is a better place. You may have to try several times. It takes some skill. Birds seldom come close. Rain can spoil it. One needs lots of rooms. It's a mix of ideas. Okay, somebody says. Okay, yes, it's a mix of ideas, but can you give it a meaning? One meaning that'll tie it all together. One reads the OT in terms of the NT types. Okay. Any other ideas? What is this paragraph actually describing? If you were to title it, how would you title it? What's the meaning it conveys? Okay, for want of time, there are no alphabet soup. Somebody says there's no clear connection. Actually, yes, I think Pritish Kurula has got it right. It's about flying kites. Okay, I don't know how he got it right. It's about flying kites. Congratulations. So now that you know it's about flying kites, try reading this. Newspaper is better than a magazine to make a kite, right? A seashore is a better place than a street. At first, it's better to run than to walk, okay, for it to take off. You may have to try several times before you launch it. It takes some skill. Young children enjoy it immensely. Complications are minimal. Birds seldom come close to. Rains can, wreak havoc, and so on and so forth, right? So once you know that it's about flying kites, then the whole passage makes a lot of sense. Every sentence is so meaningful and so rich. But without it, without knowing the context, it's absolutely meaningless, and anybody can construct any meaning that we want to from all of this, isn't it?